Members, take your seats. We're going to take votes. If you're not here, we will leave the roll open. We are missing one Democrat and one Republican at this point. They, I understand, have left, not necessarily excused absences, but that's the fact of life. But everyone else, I'm told, is in the building, and if you're not in your seat, we're holding the roll open so we get these items moved. So we are on page 21. Senator Lowenthal.
Approve the staff recommendation to approve the governor's proposal.
Want to put on your mic and say that again?
Yes. I recommend that we approve the staff recommendation to approve the governor's proposal.
Thank you very much. I understand Republicans are abstaining, and we will have Democratic support. I don't know that we have 9 in the room, so we will hold that vote open. Moving on to page 22. This has to do with the governor's decision to rescind the sale leaseback of state buildings. There are some solutions so that we can pay for this. Finance.
Greg Bruss, Department of Finance. Yes, last week the governor rescinded the sale leaseback of the office buildings, and in to offset that lost solution, we proposed several more solutions, including new loans, loan extensions of ones that were being repaid in 11-12, and some transfers of funds.
Thank you. And the reason we're doing this, and I support the governor in it, though I have to acknowledge I was one of those who did vote for this, never liked it. Desperate at the time for $1 billion, but the governor has identified a way for us to lower an interest rate from about 10% down to as low as 1 or 2%?
Correct.
That's a much better way to borrow.
Yes.
All right. So
Mr.
that
Chairman,
is the situation. Senator Rubio?
I'd like to move on staff's recommendation to approve the governor's proposal.
That is the motion. Without objection. Thank you. We have votes here now? What page is that? Colleagues, we're going to move back to page 18 for just a moment. All right, we have a motion before us. That was Senator Lamalfa's. To reiterate, if I hope I can do this accurately, is to take the $5 million unexpended dollars from 1011 for the Operation Welcome Home and to place it in the 11-12 budget. That is $5 million worth, and we'll need to call the roll on that. Finance, did you have a comment?
Two questions, if I may, Mr. Chair. First, a point of clarification, would that be a one-time or ongoing shift?
Senator LaMalfa, is your motion for one time, 10, 11, 12, or for ongoing for this Operation Welcome Home?
Well, as it'll be a multi-year
Ongoing.
need, it'd be ongoing.
Ongoing.
So,
And further, notwithstanding the merits of the activities as discussed, the administration would not support such an augmentation. It continues to be supportive of that which is reflected in the governor's budget and the recent finance letter.
The February finance letter, right. So thank you for that clarification.
does it still reflect the 2.6 that was
The 2.6 always was in the budget. That does not change.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you.
The 2.6 was restored by the recent finance letter.
That's right.
In the letter, yeah.
That's
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Everyone's clear? Because we're going to have a roll call vote.
Ongoing.
It's ongoing for a program that is not yet fully implemented. Call the roll, please.
Leno.
No.
Huff. Alquist.
No.
Anderson. Desaulnier.
No.
Emerson. Evans. Fuller. Hancock. LaMalfa. Liu. Lowenthal.
No.
Rubio.
No.
Semidian.
No.
Wolk.
First time he's ever followed directions.
Senator Wolk.
No.
Right. The motion fails.
In all seriousness, Mr. Chairman, the item that we're on is?
This is page 18.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion on, as it relates to the state operations and local assistance for veteran services, to adopt the February proposal put forth by the administration.
And just to clarify, that does continue the $2.6 million funding for veteran services, but does not include the $5 million that Senator LaMalfa had in his motion.
It is.
For Operations Welcome Home. And that will pass with Democrats in support and with the Republicans abstaining. So that motion passes. Thank you.
Where are we going now?
Folks, we have 3 large sections left, but I think they shall go rather quickly. That would be the 3 R's, realignment, redevelopment, and revenues. Well, let's begin with redevelopment, page 23. And LAO, if you could walk us through the governor's proposal.
Marianne O'Malley with the Legislative Analyst Office. The governor proposes to eliminate redevelopment agencies and use the funds for a 1-year state benefit of $1.7 billion. And then in future years, the revenues would be allocated largely pursuant to the existing property tax allocation system.
Very good. Could you remind the committee of the LAO's position on redevelopment in recent publications?
Redevelopment is a remarkable tool at the local level and gives local government some ability to invest in local priorities. From a statewide standpoint, we don't have any reliable evidence that redevelopment spurs overall statewide economic development. So our recommendation is that, given that this is largely a local program with local benefits, that maintaining a program that has statewide, very significant statewide cost, given the many difficulties that you're facing right now, it does not appear warranted. And so we find merit in the administration's proposal.
Very good. And again, just to clarify the public policy question before us, and you correct me if my numbers are off, but we're talking about a pool of about $5.7 billion annually used for redevelopment purposes.
The most recent data that we've gotten is, yes, 5.7
Property
billion.
taxes that otherwise would go to special districts, cities, counties, and school districts.
That is correct.
Though there is a general fund impact of about $3.2 billion, given that we then backfill support for education.
If redevelopment agencies were eliminated, roughly a little bit more than half, perhaps about 57% of the property taxes, once that debt is paid, would return to schools, and that increased property taxes to schools would reduce ongoing state cost.
Very good. So that's the question before us. Senator Lowenthal, I know you've worked on this issue.
I just want to know that there have been other proposals that say or that question the $1.7 billion in savings. Can you tell us whether you're comfortable with the Department of Finance numbers of $1.7 billion?
There was an analysis recently prepared by I think it's called the Big Ten City, and that suggested that the Department of Finance's analysis is incorrect and that perhaps only about half of that funds would be available. We reviewed that analysis and discussed it with the people who developed it and had some very serious concerns with their approach. We raised issues. They have not yet gotten back to us. But in terms of that alternative analysis suggesting something more in the range of only $800 million, we did not find merit in their proposal, in their analysis. In terms of the administration's approach, in terms of $1.7 billion, it is very difficult to say for sure the amount of funds that the state would be able to raise. It was a reasonable approach, what the administration has done. We could not really corroborate and say that $1.7 billion is the accurate number, though.
Thank you.
Senator Wilk.
Thank you, Senator Leno. This issue was heard in front of the Senate Governance and Finance Committee, quite a long hearing on redevelopment, and I know that there have been other hearings as well. For many of us who have served in local government and have been on redevelopment agency boards, this is not an easy vote to take at all. If I could just sum up for us, and in general throughout the state, it's not a question of whether redevelopment agencies have done good or bad things. That's really not the issue in front of us. The issue has to do with the way the agencies are funded, and that includes a diversion of property tax from schools, cities, and cities' own general fund, counties, and in particular the backfill that the state general fund does for the schools, which is in the billions. That is the issue for us. And we have been very open to other, as the governor has, to other proposals. If this is unacceptable, what then deals with the general fund backfill? There are other proposals being put forward to deal with the fact that we do need at the local level a financing mechanism, which redevelopment agencies have filled since the 80s in particular. Yes. But there are other ways of structuring that that would also bring those benefits of local economic creation to the local level. The housing issue is also one that the governor has proposed. We need to take a look at those, but the basic issue is not whether they're good or bad. We have come to a point where the state general fund must have some relief in order to continue to provide any services at all at any reasonable level. So I would support reluctantly the proposal.
Thank you, Senator Wilk. Ms. O'Malley, I know that Senator Emerson wants to ask some questions as well. should we accept the governor's proposal and should it be enacted, as you mentioned, the property tax dollars would revert back in majority to school districts, but also to special districts, the cities and the counties. With that money, there would be nothing prohibiting them from using infrastructure finance districts or other ways to invest in redevelopment, that they would still have the ability to use tax increment funding mechanism. And we, the legislature, could create some other version of it after the fact. I mean, all of these possibilities are there, that the governor's not in any way suggesting that there's no need for economic development or redevelopment. It's just going to be in a different fashion. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. The entirety of redevelopment law would remain, with the exception of this particular tax increment revenue financing stream.
For the districts.
For the districts. So if a local government passed a local tax, or if a local government created an infrastructure financing district, which doesn't divert school property taxes, the local government could use those revenues under redevelopment law for economic development purposes.
Making use of tax increment funding.
Yeah.
Financing, yes. Senator Emerson, I thank you.
To the Department of Finance, do you have some specific language on this, and does it include eliminating the housing element for local government?
Crisfield Department of Finance. The language is in its final stages, and it should be ready in the very near future. And your question was concerning how the language is going to deal with housing element. Well, the monies that are currently in the low mod housing funds under our proposal would revert to the control of the local housing authority, in whose jurisdiction the redevelopment agency is located. However, under our proposal, we're still leaving the framework of the California redevelopment law in place. We're eliminating existing RDAs, but under our proposal, a city, if they so choose, could form a new redevelopment agency in the future and fund it using its own revenues only. And if they choose to do that, they could also choose to operate the housing element if they see fit. They could continue to administer the low-mod housing fund if they choose to reform a new redevelopment agency.
So you're going to leave the requirement there that this local government has to come up with the housing element, not provide?
No, the requirement that the set aside for the low-mod housing fund, that requirement would go away. There'd be no more need to put 20% in.
All right.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Emerson. Senator DeSaulnier and then Senator Rubio.
Two brief questions. Also, just a comment that we did have a joint hearing with Assembly Housing and Senate Transportation Housing. We had a hearing on the housing issues, which were interesting. Two things. One, to the finance. There's been some confusion about indebtedness, and I know Senator Hancock and I had a discussion with some of the East Bay cities, and a lot of them have both bonded indebtedness, but they also have contractual indebtedness. Could you? Things that are already contractually indebted, even if it's a city that has used redevelopment money and needs to be repaid from redevelopment funds, but under existing, they have a relationship, not in the last few months. I assume that those funds are legally still obligated for their contractual debt service.
Correct. That is the vision behind our proposal, is that any valid contract in which their substantial performance has been rendered, that would still be valid. And when we did our calculations, we did include all of those obligations into our factors. We included tax allocation bonds, revenue bonds, city-county loans, and other long-term debt. Those are the various classifications from the State Controller's Office report that we factored into our calculations.
And we couldn't change those even if we wanted to.
Correct. We have no desire to absolve any one of their currently existing valid contractual obligations.
And then the second question is, maybe this is for the LAO, is how does this help the state budget in the out years?
Under the administration's proposal, I don't believe it does help the state in the out years, because they're proposing to use the $1.7 billion in the first year for offsetting state costs. But in the out years, under the proposal as it's been described to us, those funds would be given to schools on top of the state's normal Prop 98 obligations. So the administration's proposal, as it has been described, would not provide ongoing fiscal relief for the state. Our office has recommended that instead of using that approach, that those property taxes that are returned to schools count under the normal Prop 98 system. And that would provide ongoing state fiscal relief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I agree that under our proposal, the monies received by schools would not offset Prop 98. However, I would note that there would be a general fund benefit nonetheless, because if you eliminate the ability of redevelopment agencies to expand and to continue to build a new project area, form a new project area, and then take monies from property tax from schools, to put it a certain way, you're stopping the bleeding. You're eliminating their ability to prospectively take money in the future that they're currently not taking from schools.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator DeSaulnier. Very important point you make. Many major projects in San Francisco ongoing. One, for example, is the Transbay Terminal, which is going to be a Grand Central station for the West Coast, even incorporating our high-speed rail when we get there. And the Board of Supervisors signed contracts going back 6 years. The existing transit terminal has already been demolished. Ground has been broken. Federal government's in for nearly $1 billion. It's a multi-billion-dollar project. I've been assured by the administration that this qualifies for their recognition of existing obligation. One question for finance, and then we're going to Senator Wright and then to Senator Emerson. With regard to the governor's public statements proposing a 55% threshold for the passage of taxes or bonds for purposes of development and redevelopment, that's for a future ballot, a future proposal. Is that going to be written into the language of when you finish your statute?
And the legislation the bill that we're going to be bringing forward in the immediate future will not have that language in it.
That is not in it?
Correct.
Okay, very good. Senator Wright.
Curious, I heard the mention of tax increment absent having the property tax. How does that work? You described it as tax increment, and I don't know, if you don't have the property tax, where do you get the increment from?
Good question. There are many states that have tax increment financing. Redevelopment is not unique to California. But what you have in some other states is they have a redevelopment type of program, but they do not allow the entity to use school tax increment revenues. So they limit the pool of tax increment revenues to only the city, county, and special districts. And so there are a variety of proposals, which are infrastructure financing districts, that allow a city to divert the revenues that otherwise would have gone to the county and otherwise would have gone to the special district, but do not allow the district to redirect funds that otherwise would have gone to the schools. So it's a limited form of tax increment.
Okay, so you're still using the property tax as the
still
basis,
using the property tax,
but you're withholding the school portion.
That is correct.
Okay. Those programs that are currently in play, I think, as the chairman mentioned, those would be held harmless. But if you remove the authority, you're simply, in this proposal, you're dissolving the agency itself.
Under the administration's proposal, they dissolve the agency, but all existing contractual debt is paid. All right?
So if a city wanted then, subsequent to this proposal, to go forward with redevelopment, what would be their avenue to do that, absent there being additional legislation?
Absent there being additional legislation, a local government could use infrastructure financing district law. They could raise a tax at the local level or have an assessment at the local level and use those revenues, self-financing, and use those funds for redevelopment purposes.
But all of those proposals would require a two-thirds vote to encumber the property or parcel taxes.
One of the key differences between redevelopment as a tool for local governments and these other tools is that vote. Redevelopment is the one source of revenues at the local level that does not require voter approval, and you can and also doesn't result in an immediate tax increase.
But the reason is because when you do redevelopment, you don't raise the tax. You simply encumber the tax that was already there, and because you didn't raise it, it doesn't require a vote. You transferred it, but the other things that you're describing would all require a vote because you'd be placing an additional encumbrance, which would require a two-third vote under existing law.
That would be correct.
Okay.
Senator Emerson and then Senator Wilk.
To the Department of Finance, you talked about what you're expecting in the language. Does your bill include monies outside of Prop 98? Do you address that issue?
Yeah, the vision is that the monies that are received by schools under our proposal, the additional pass-throughs that they get after the debt has been paid for the existing agencies, that money would be outside of the Proposition 98 obligation. So it would not offset Prop 98.
Okay.
Senator Wilk.
Wanted to follow up on Senator Wright's concerns and what happens if this proposal goes forward. What then do we have in the future? And I have introduced a bill, SB 214, which takes the infrastructure financing districts that currently exists on the books and changes some of the requirements so that the districts would be comparable, if not identical, to the kinds of processes that redevelopment agencies use now. And that's in terms of voter thresholds and how they use how they can be used as a financing mechanism. So I think, even though the governor's office, it doesn't sound as if they're interested in the 55 in exploring this 55% proposal at this time. That doesn't mean that the legislature, if it felt it incumbent to replace RDAs with something else that would allow local economic development to move forward, doesn't mean that we can't push that forward ourselves. And I think that's something we ought to seriously consider. So that's why there's a vehicle out.
Very good. Senator Rubio.
Thanks, Senator.
Senator Lowenthal, then Senator Rubio.
Very easy. What I don't understand is, or where we are, is the out year. I understand the $1.7 billion savings this year. The governor's proposal in the out years does, as that money is transferred to schools, let's say, does not result in any savings of general fund because it does not count towards the Prop 98 guarantee. The LAO is saying that can be tweaked or changed so that there really is an ongoing general fund savings. How are we going to resolve that issue? Are we going to resolve that in this? Or are we going to leave it open for future legislation? I'm not clear where that is at this moment, the out-year part of this proposal.
That's certainly a conversation for the legislature to have.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Simitian.
On this point, thinking that we can define with certainty and clarity the difference between supplement and supplant, I think is an optimistic wish. I think experience tells us that no matter how carefully we draft the language, there's always a little fuzziness. For example, in better times, which we've had in the past and which we hope we'll have in the future, it is fairly common for the legislature to, quote, over-appropriate Prop 98. That's a phrase that a lot of us in the school community don't love because we don't think of it as an over-appropriation. We think Prop 98 is the guaranteed minimum, and if we put some extra money into the mix, that's a good thing because we need the money for our schools. In the case that was described by the representative at the table, that money might be characterized as supplementing Prop 98 in the future, but it would obviate the need to provide general fund dollars, which would provide relief to the general fund. Mm-hmm. And it would also mean that those funds, if they were, and correct me if I'm wrong, if they were independent of Prop 98, would not lock us in at the higher level. It would mean that we could provide the extra money without being caught up in the requirements of Prop 98 on a going forward basis. So I would make the case that thinking we know with certainty the difference between supplement and supplant on Prop 98 funding is a hard case to make. Given the structure that's proposed, however, I would anticipate both that it would obviate the need for some general fund money in years when we wanted to do more and would otherwise have general fund money over appropriating Prop 98. It would also provide additional flexibility for the general fund because it would not lock in that higher level in subsequent years. So it provides significant relief in both those ways in my assessment, and I'll see if the presenter thinks my critique is an accurate one.
I think that's a fair assessment. Proposition 98, the mechanics thereof are a little bit outside my area of expertise, but I think that that's a fair characterization.
Mr. Malley, you want to confirm or deny?
Just make things slightly more complicated.
Oh, we love that. Thank you.
Not only is there a very strong fiscal issue, which merits a good conversation, but there are also some equity issues, some policy concerns. Some counties are very active in redevelopment, and some less so, and some don't have any redevelopment at all. So would we only be giving that supplement to those school districts in counties where redevelopment has been dissolved? I mean, it brings up issues as to which schools should benefit from the dissolution of redevelopment agencies.
Doesn't the LAO's report indicate that there are something like 15 counties where there isn't really any significant redevelopment activity, and therefore that issue of additional funding might be moot? Is that the concern?
Right, that those schools in those counties would not receive any supplemental funds, whereas schools in counties where redevelopment has been very active would get a large amount of funding above and beyond their Prop 98 amounts. So our suggestion is to treat these revenues as property taxes and then make independent decisions regarding your level of appropriation for Prop 98.
Thank you, Mr. O'Malley. Senator Lowenthal.
Yeah, I think one other issue that is going to need to be addressed by the legislature in the future, if we move in this direction, is the fact that under the formula, if we do eliminate the redevelopment agencies and the money goes back to, besides the schools now we're talking about the counties, the cities, and the special districts, talking about the cities, that some cities, when AB 8 and after Prop 13 were low-tax cities. They may be redevelopment agencies. And so when that money now goes back, they may have generated that money in redevelopment, but they may not get it back in terms of the city because of the inequitable distribution of the way counties distribute monies back to cities. So we may have cities that say, well, I contributed a lot of money in the redevelopment, but I'm getting nothing back as the change as it occurs. And other cities that haven't, that may get more back. And so I think there are issues that still will need to be resolved as this goes forward.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Alquist.
Thank you. Brief comment. I think it's going to be a future discussion on the equity of counties that where the cities don't have redevelopment projects. But one point that comes quickly to my mind is that if a school district was in a city where they did not have redevelopment, then that means all along they were not getting money taken out of their school district. Just to put that out there. Not big discussion right now, but I'm just saying it may not be the huge issue that we think it is.
Thank you, Senator Alquist. Senator Wright, and then we're moving to Senator Rubio, and we're going to conclude this conversation so we can
I'm not clear. My understanding of 98, and rescue me if I'm wrong, the first dollar that goes into the pot is the local property tax dollar. So for example, I've got several cities in L.A. County that became basic aid, which means that they take no money from the general fund because they wanted their own autonomy. So if those school districts, to Senator Lowenthal's point, if we return that local property tax money, that's the first money that goes into the pot. We add the difference necessary to get them to the revenue limit. So it wouldn't be extra money that would be paid because they would get to the revenue limit with the balance between what we put in and what their property tax allocation was. So, I mean, like I've got a district like Compton that has a very low property tax base. So the amount of state money that goes to Compton is higher because the property tax base is lower. Part of that was the Serrano decision that said that you had to have a basic amount of state to each one. So I'm not sure how you would over-allocate, because if that money were there, they would simply have to, we'd pay less, to the other gentleman's point. So there would be, if we were shutting down redevelopment agencies or restoring that money, there'd be that fund.
I got to drive 4.5 hours.
You're correct that redevelopment would treat a basic aid district somewhat differently than a non-basic aid district. Basic aid districts get all their revenue limit amount fully funded through local property taxes. Right. So if we give them more local property taxes, that doesn't offset state aid. And there are basic aid districts are, 4% of the state's population of children? Some number like that. So in basic aid districts, they would, if we treat it as property taxes, they will get additional property taxes, and it would not offset state aid. But that's a very small minority of the children in California. For most of the children in California and most of our school districts, if we treat this redevelopment revenues as local property taxes, it would indeed offset state general fund obligations accordingly.
Thank you, Ms. O'Malley. Thank you, Senator Wright. Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, we all know those who have chaired meetings or hearings, rather, on this particular subject, they have run long and very complicated. And I want, because of that fact, I think we all should thank staff, because this has been perhaps one of the most labor-intensive projects that I've undertaken in some time. And I also want to thank those from the local communities who've come forward, the city managers, the mayors, the city council members, the supervisors. This is a very difficult issue, because the one topic that has not been brought up today is the issue of jobs. And for many of us who have districts with high unemployment, this is an instrument or a tool that local governments can use to create those jobs. And so personally, while I think we should redefine redevelopments, not eliminate them altogether, there is a lot of discussion about how or what will become the alternative. And so those who are watching, I know many are, there is a strong commitment of this legislature to move forward with an alternative after this action today, to come up with some alternative to provide the ability to redevelopment at the local level. But I think this is just the first of the beginning. I mean, it touched on just what revenue we will see from this action. Will it be the full $1.7 billion? Will it be the $861 million, I think, that's come forward by an independent review? And will it pass the legal battles? I think all of that will come to play in the near future. But for here and now, I will, Mr. Chairman, as difficult as it is, move on staff's recommendation, which is to approve the proposal.
Thank you. Senator Rubio, you have a comment?
Yeah.
Senator Emerson?
I have one quick question of finance. How much money is going to be freed up for other state budget items outside of Prop 98?
In 2011-12, this $1.7 billion, of which $840 million would offset Medi-Cal costs and $860 million would offset trial court costs, and that's a one-time amount in 11-12. In future years, there's no general fund offset.
Thank you, Senator. Clearly, colleagues, we're considering major change to the way the state does business. Not only here on this subject today, but on so many different areas. So we're dealing, again, as I mentioned our first day here, with a loss of $40 billion of revenue that we expected to have in our general fund this year. $125 billion, we're going to be looking at $85 billion. So we're considering things we have not considered before. Maybe the LAO has, we haven't. And so none of this is easy, and we're talking about major change. We know change is not easy. So for those who are going to be distressed by decisions proposed today, specifically with regard to redevelopment, I want to reiterate Senator Rubio's comment that this is not so much the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a conversation. And with that, we will accept Senator Rubio's motion, and it will pass with Democratic support and Republicans. No.
I have to leave because there's only one flight until tomorrow night.
I understand. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So that will so this does pass out, party line vote. And before we go further to realignment and then conclude with revenues, we're going to go back to page 21, which is the Williamson Act. Page 21. Senator Lowenthal.
Yes, I am quickly moving there. To approve, to concur with the staff recommendation to approve the governor's proposal on Williamson Act open spaces subventions.
Thank you, Senator Lowenthal. Again, a new way of doing business, at least for now. Difficult issue for most of us here, and saving $10 million in the current year and in the budget year. So that is the motion to sustain the governor's proposal. I believe so that will pass with Democrats in support and all Republicans. And all Republicans abstaining. One moment, please. And so Republicans off as well as Senator Rubio. That does pass. Moving on to realignment. It's on page 34. Thanks for hanging in there, committee members. We're still on track for our 2:30 conclusion. Senator Wolk's committee has heard many hours of testimony on the governor's realignment proposal. And so I'm going to ask Senator Wolk if you could share with us where you have gone, what you have reached, along with your Vice Chair, Senator Huff.
Yes, I'm sorry he had to leave, but I would like to inject a minimal note of optimism into our 3 days of discussion. The governor did propose, with respect to realignment, a real opportunity, it seems to me. As I said before, crisis does breed opportunity, and this is an opportunity with realignment to provide better value for the taxpayer and for the citizen who receives the services that are being proposed for realignment. We're going to deal with public safety and fire service, child welfare and support, mental health, part of the judiciary, security issues, Prop 63, and adult protective services. Our committee had hearings on realignment and then some very specific examples at another hearing of ways at which this kind of integration of services would be and has been a very positive event. Senator Huff and I have written a letter which is being handed out as we speak, which highlights areas of agreement between us. We feel that these are programs that are good candidates for realignment and that there are some issues, of course, always, that need to be taken into account. And this is what we observed at our hearings. There are some things, and I'm not going to, it's a 2-page letter, but I'm just going to highlight the areas. We need to have the counties need to have flexibility and control over their fiscal resources. Basically, they need to be able to blend funding. They need the authority to do that and to shift funding among locally defined priorities. Local agencies need to have the ability to craft delivery strategies that tailor to those needs. They need flexibility. That if they need regional partnerships to provide services or collaborations, we should make that easy to do. Systems that reflect geographic, fiscal, and demographic differences. We should enable the ability to use fiscal incentives in the funding that is devolved to the local level to reward improved outcomes. There were some examples of reserves that were set up specifically for innovation that have been very successful. San Diego was one of those examples. We need to remove some of the impediments to sharing information. That is critical to allow counties to do a good job. And we need to create a focus on outcomes and some specific things. And these need to be incorporated into our trailer bills or our approach over the next several weeks or months. We need state-local partnerships to develop outcomes. This is just not something the state imposes. This is something that comes from working with the counties and the various stakeholders and the state agencies to put together. We have to let go as a state. We have to rethink the role of state agencies. This is about letting go. The state will not have the same role that it's had in the past, and we have to be comfortable with that. And we have to recognize that there will be transitions. The most obvious one that I just want to talk about is the juvenile justice issues. We may, over a short, medium term, or longer, need to retain some state institution especially if some counties can or cannot accommodate, for good reason, those particular juveniles that may be coming back to their counties. So those were some of the principles that Senator Huff and I think are extremely important as we go forward. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that both of us felt very strongly that the counties needed to be commended for the positive way they have approached these issues. They are complicated. The timeline is short, but there is a crisis, and the services cannot continue to be provided the way they have. The money's not there in the amounts that we would all like, nor can the state continue to provide. We aren't able to provide these services in the way that we might like. So this is an opportunity, and Senator Huff and I put this to the chair and for future incorporation into trailer bills and other policy considerations, and to the governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wilk, for all of your intense efforts on this. Clearly, the devil is in the details, and I'm thinking back, Ms. O'Malley, of all the many hours that we have spent on this subject, and memories of our colleague, Senator Ducheney, when she chaired this committee, and our map of the yellow brick road of from where we have come and where we've gone since the passage of Prop 13 in 1978, all of the twists and turns and the tying of the knots, that this begins to try to make sense of some of that. And as the LAO has shared with us so many times, that there are certain programs that are best delivered at the local level. There are others that maybe are best served at the state. And just to clarify that the proposal before us would shift about $6 billion in 5.9, I think it is, in state costs and then program responsibilities counties, specifically with regard to criminal justice, mental health, and child welfare. And then it's also then dependent upon the financing of it through the maintenance of 2010 tax rates that the governor hopes to have before the voters in June. Mr. O'Malley, did you want to add anything else to this? We're tight on time, so we're not looking for a conversation we've already had. I know that we have Mr. Overholt from the AOC with us as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome, sir.
Members. The proposal on the shift to the judicial branch in the court security would shift funding and responsibility of trial court security in 56 of the 58 counties from the state to the counties. In 2 counties, Shasta and Trinity, court security is provided by local marshal service under those 2 courts. In every other county, the security is provided by the local sheriff. There are 2 general issues that we have concerns about that we're working with finance and your committee staff on. One is the amount identified here. We believe overstates the amount that is necessary for sheriff-provided security. We have included in that amount the amount to support the 2 marshal service that I mentioned, as well as court attendants and other non-sheriff security services. So we believe that amount needs to be backed out to get to the correct amount, and we're working with finance and your staff on that issue. The other issue is related to governance, so that we ensure that the presiding judge and local courts continue to have a role in determining what level of service is necessary for an appropriate level of security. And we're working with the stakeholder groups to ensure that that is written into the proposal as well. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Overall. So, committee members, we have realignment issues starting on page 34 with court security, 35 public safety grants, page 36 realignment of corrections populations, 37 shift state responsibility areas to locals, 38 is the proposal to realign state-supported substance abuse treatment programs to the counties. And the recommended action is to take all of this as one vote.
I'll be glad to move that.
And to recognize that there will be modifications necessary to address all of the many details, and that this will be in conference committee so that we can continue work on those many details.
I'll be glad
so
to
that
move
is
that
motion by Senator Wolk. Senator Lamalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're just concerned that do we have specific implementation and language and allocation language for these pieces, or maybe jump in admin.
Drew Soderborg, go ahead.
Jennifer Osborne, Department of Finance. The language is currently being drafted, and kind of this process has been sort of an iterative process with different stakeholder groups, and kind of trying to find out what pieces of it worked and what are the concerns. And so, based on that, the process of drafting the language has begun, and so there isn't anything currently today. But it's our understanding that as we move through conference committee, that will be finalized.
So, when do you expect we can see some finalized language then?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know the date about when it will be ready.
All right. Well, and it still is tied to the sales tax and vehicle license fee extensions, correct?
That's my understanding.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for speaking for Republicans, I feel we're going to have to reject at this time. I think there's merit in trying to look at things in a new way with realignment. But we're going to have to reject this as proposed at this time.
Very good. So just to clarify, because the agenda skips around just a little bit, part of the realignment package we're about to vote on also includes page 40, which is the Child Welfare Services realignment. We're going to take up the issue on page 41, which is Adult Protective Services, separately. So, sorry, 41 is part of this package. That is realigning Adult Protective Services. We will take up pages 42 and 43, which is the Prop 63 shift, separately. So, with the exception of the county share of child support collections, everything else being a part of Senator Wolk's motion.
Yep.
And that will pass with Democrats voting aye and Republicans abstaining? Or
voting no.
Republicans voting no. And that will be the order of the committee.
That's great.
Colleagues, we're getting close. We want to ask you to turn to page 42 so we can take up the Prop 63 issue next. We have the Director of Department of Mental Health here, Mr. Allenby.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, the staff analysis really clearly presents the issue. We're asking for realignment in the first year, which would be 2011, 2012. We're asking that Prop 63 dollars be redirected to cover mental health managed care, early periodic screening testing program, and AB 3632. In future years, beginning 2012, 2013, these programs would be funded with the revenue source that would occur as a result of the election that hopefully will occur in June.
That's right.
And the programs are all federally mandated programs. The one program, AB 3632, is a state mandate because it requires counties to carry out the programs.
It goes back to 1984, I think.
I was around,
yes,
unfortunately, when it occurred. But we believe that the real test is that our assertion is that you, the legislature, can redirect the money from Prop 63 to those programs for the first year, and that it can be done with a 2/3 vote of your bodies, because the action will be in furtherance of the act. The net effect of a variety of things, the future would be much better for local government. The state is overmatched the program since its inception, and we believe that the combination of those two are sufficient to justify the action.
Thank you, Mr. Allenby. So again, colleagues, this recommendation, as with the rest of the package, is to accept the governor's proposal. We just wanted to draw this out so we could have the benefit of Mr. Allenby's wisdom and experience with all of these many issues, in particular AB 3632. Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator LaMalfa.
Yes, Republicans would be in support of separating the issue and in support of the fund shift. No, we're not supporting of the realignment.
So what, 2 votes?
2 votes if you wish.
So Republicans are requesting that we split this vote. So the first vote will be in support of the fund shifts, and that will pass unanimously. And the
realignment portion, we're going to wait on that concept.
And given that there are just a few details yet to be determined with regard to the realignment proposal, it will pass with Democratic support and Republicans abstaining.
Well, it still has the tax element in there, so we're going to vote no this time.
Republicans voting no. Thank you, Mr. Allenby.
Thank you.
Just one last item before we get to our last section, which is revenues. That would be page 39, the governor's proposal to suspend county share of child support collections. This is in the Department of Child Support Services. Page 39. I believe this is 1 year, 1 time.
Teresa Calvert with Department of Finance. Correct. This is a 1 year, 1 time. We recognize that as Phase 2 of realignment gets discussed, and if child support programs were part of that Phase 2 realignment, these collections would go to the counties if that program were to fully shift. But this is an 11-12 one-time suspension of these county collections, and so it doesn't affect the Phase 2 piece of realignment, or Phase 1.
And you have trailer bill language for this?
We do. We do have trailer bill language. There is a provision in there that specifies this is for fiscal year 2011-12 only.
Very good.
Republicans in support.
All right. Any questions, folks? Then this will pass. We have a motion by Senator Saulnier to approve the governor's proposal, and that will pass unanimously. Thank you. Revenues begin on page 44. Saving the best for last.
Maybe.
Third grade arithmetic. We did the subtraction, now we're on to the addition. Finance.
Good afternoon, Jay Chamberlain with the Department of Finance. And would you prefer that I cover the entire revenue package?
I think that makes sense. Go right ahead.
Okay. The governor's revenue package, the major revenue components, there are 6 pieces here. The first 2 are revenues that are maintaining current revenues that would be dedicated to realignment. The first of those would be the 1% sales tax rate that was adopted in 2009, effective I think April 2009, set to expire June 30th of 2011. The governor's proposal is for a constitutional amendment put on the ballot that, if approved, would extend those taxes from July 1st, 2011 through June 30th of 2016. This proposal is expected to bring in about $4.5 billion within the budget window. Okay. And on page 45, the next item, which is also dedicated to fund realignment, that is to extend the 0.5% vehicle license fee, which again was adopted in 2009, set to expire June 30th of 2011. The governor's proposal would be for a constitutional amendment to be put on the ballot that would extend the 0.5% vehicle license fee through June 30th of 2016.
Thank you. And on this one, Mr. Sisney, I know the LAO has often argued in support of a vehicle license fee, not necessarily at the historic 2% level, but close to the 1%, which is how we assess tax on all other property.
That's correct. We're comfortable with the administration's proposal, and it would put vehicles in a similar taxing situation as other property.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Sisney. So that's page 45. Page 46 is the personal income tax.
Yes, personal income tax. Again, going back to 2009, there was a 0.25% surcharge added to each of the personal income tax rates. That is set to expire for the 2010 tax year. So the governor's proposal is again to put on the ballot an initiative that would extend the 0.25% surcharge through 2015.
So maintaining 2010 tax levels for 5 years.
That's right. Right. And that's expected to bring in about $3.2 billion, $3.3 billion.
And then page 47 has to do with a tax exemption, which you correct me if I'm off historically. It slightly predates my arrival here, but this was put in place in 1999, I think. It was at the height of the dot-com boom. This was supposedly a good times tax credit. What's the proposal?
That's true. The proposal is to drop it back to, or to maintain it at the level that it has been for 2009 and 2010.
The suggestion may be the good times are not currently here.
Yes. And so to have it equal to where the personal exemption credit is. And as you said, this was historically the way it's been through the 80s and 90s.
Consistent with the personal exemption credit.
Yes, yes. And again, this would there'd be a ballot initiative that would extend this through 2015, and this is expected to bring in about $2 billion in the budget window.
$2 billion in the budget year.
Yeah.
Not insignificant. Okay. And then page 48.
Okay, the next proposal, the next 2 proposals are closing tax loopholes. The first one would be to require taxpayers, multi-state, multinational corporations to use a single sales factor to apportion their income. Again, going back to 2009, the legislature adopted an elective single sales factor. The purpose of single sales factor apportionment just to put it briefly, is that it takes away disincentives for economic activity to occur in California. But when you make it elective, you only remove that disincentive for people who elect. Those who don't elect still have the disincentive. So this proposal would put everyone on a level playing field and would remove the disincentive for all taxpayers.
Elio, is it accurate to say that the current optional actually encourages or gives incentives to investment and employment out of state?
We think that in certain circumstances that it does create an unintended incentive for expansion out of state. Yes, and so moving to a mandatory single sales factor could address that unintended incentive issue.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, Senator Anderson.
Perhaps you could clarify this for me a little bit. You referred to it as a loophole. What is your definition of a loophole? I just want to go back to it. It was moving rapidly.
Well, it's a loophole in the sense that it allows a tax cut for taxpayers can choose the way they want to be taxed, and therefore can choose the lower tax. So whether, if we set it's a loophole relative to having a system where everyone uses the same apportionment method.
So would in the definition that you're thinking, when I mark that I have dependents, that's a loophole too, correct? Because it changes and alters my tax and gives me added benefit for having dependents.
Everyone who has dependents is allowed to take that.
But that would be a loophole under your definition. Is that correct or no?
No, that would not be a loophole.
Okay, so what's the difference between the two?
The difference.
Senator Anderson, I'm just going to, since we're arguing over it, maybe you just want to retract the word loophole and move on.
That works for me?
That's
All right.
fine.
Very good. Okay. Elio, do you want to share any thoughts on page 48 on the mandatory single sales?
We agree with the administration on this issue. We would recommend adoption of the governor's proposal.
All right. Very good.
And let me one other aspect of this is that it would require all taxpayers to assign the sales of intangibles and services using a market sourcing rule as opposed to a cost performance rule. And that is consistent with single sales factor apportionment.
Thank you, Mr. Chamberlain. And then the last one would have to do with the enterprise zones.
Okay. The final major revenue proposal would be to eliminate enterprise zones effective for all tax years beginning on or after 1/1/2011. It would repeal any credits that would be generated in 2011 or later, and it would also repeal the use of any credits that were generated in prior years but had not yet been used. Taxpayers who have prior years that they have not yet that they filed without claiming their enterprise zone credits, they can go back, file amended, and claim those. This does not take away that ability, but it does take away the ability to use credits that were generated but could not be used in those earlier years.
Good. I think that's important to note. Mr. Sisney, can you confirm I read, I can't quite remember where, that 7 of 10 enterprise zone dollars benefit corporations which have assets of over $1 billion?
I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but I believe that in general that is correct. A very significant portion of the benefit goes to large firms.
Very good. Okay. So that is the governor's revenue proposal, pages 44 through 49. Senator Wright, we'll get to you in just a second. Okay. My suggestion is, if it's agreeable to folks, that we could take this, since there's no alteration in the recommended proposal, there's no alteration of the governor's proposed revenue package, so we could take it up as one. Senator Wright?
Yeah, the concern I would have is one of the dings that we get in California is that we promote uncertainty. The single sales factor, the cost of performance issue, we just passed it last year. So there are companies who made business decisions about California based on a law that we did one year, and we're going to take it back the next year. The fact that a company might be $1 billion company, if they located in Compton because I was able to lure them with an enterprise zone, that's a good thing. I mean, I don't know that because it's $1 billion company, I don't like it. I think that the fact that we've vacillated on the cost of performance and the other things, we've already in this discussion done the damage to the business climate. Can I predict how much it is? I can't. But clearly, if I were a business person looking at California, recognizing that a deal that's made with me in 2010 could be taken away in 2011 is a scary proposition.
Thank you, Senator Wright. Motion? Senator Saulnier has moved the governor's package of revenue proposals. Senator LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I know this will come as a news flash to you and those watching, but Republicans are not excited about the tax increases here, where we go to the sales tax, the vehicle license. But to follow on Mr. Wright's comment, too, when we contemplate the enterprise zones, you have people also making long-term decisions in those zones, and the unpredictability, the fact that it'll be scored as a tax increase for those that have already committed assets and resources into those, that's problematic for us as well. So we'll be in opposition to these measures.
Sure. And Senator LaMalfa, your comment is also well taken, and I can say as a small business owner myself, in an enterprise zone, though I have not benefited from it, that this can be jarring. But it's in the context of our trying to do our business with a third of our revenue having evaporated. So everyone, including the state government, and everyone down to local governments and everyone in between, we all find ourselves in a tough position right now, and we're making tough decisions.
Indeed. It'd be one argument that this is helping to supplant or augment current year or the upcoming year, but when you see that the administration's proposals for just 3 years from now are to grow state spending from $85 billion point here to an $111 billion point in just 3 fiscal years, you wonder, is this really a factor to try and save the state budget as it is, or does it help with long-term increases of spending? So that said, Republicans will be in opposition to this package of measures.
Very good. Before we take our vote, I want to get one thing clarified. So then the motion is to accept the governor's package of proposals. Democrats voting aye, Republicans voting no. The motion will pass. So, colleagues, we have concluded our work of the Senate Budget and Fiscal Review Committee. As we conclude, I just want to remind us of what we have accomplished in the past 3 days as we prepare to move to conference committee early next week. We have just today resolved $18.2 billion of our $27 billion problem, $5.8 billion in cuts, $11.5 billion in revenues, and $915 million, give or take a dollar, in other solutions. And in total, whereas the governor has proposed $27.6 billion, including his billion-dollar reserve, we are right on the mark, $27.6 billion. Actually, and again, my math might be off by just a little, about $50 or $60 million to the better of the governor's proposal, also including the billion-dollar reserve. So this is a lot of work in just a few days. I know we have all cast votes. We probably never thought we would experience casting, but it's necessary to meet the governor's targets, to work within the framework of his budget proposal, and I think we are a good ways forward in righting the ship of state. So I want to thank all of you for joining me in this tough exercise, for participating in the debate, and with that said, of course, before we adjourn, Senator LaMalfa would like to make a comment.
One last thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the productivity of our committee here, and not always agreeing with everything, but we would ask that we be provided the summary the actions here on the numbers that we have come up with here in order to be able to contemplate over the weekend the figures, so we're ready for conference committee. So if we could get that from Department of Finance as well as budget staff, that would be very, very appreciated.
You have my word, Senator Lamalfa.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.